I started the recording, by the way. I think Sam probably told you
Yeah.
we're going to record them and upload them so that you can view them later.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. So I will share that stuff with you after the class. One last thing, because I know we should get started. So one last thing was the prep materials. So I have a whole prep materials folder. I'll share it to your email. I think you gave me a Hotmail. Do you have a Gmail by any
I
chance?
do. Yeah. Did you need? Yeah. I
Yeah,
can.
can you put it in the chat here and then I'll share it to your Gmail because using Google Drive with Hotmail, I don't think it works very well. So I'll share that materials folder with you. In here, you'll find pretty much what you need for LR. So one thing you'll find is the step-by-step guide to answering every single logical reasoning question type. This is something that I made. And what it shows you, let me zoom in for you, is for each question type, so first you have flaw, then you have weakening, etc. Shows you what the objective of that question is. So for flaw question, it's pretty straightforward, right? You just want to find what the logical error is in that question. The keywords to look out for. So these keywords are, you know, because you've taken a test, the middle section between the stimulus and the answer choices, right?
Yeah.
Where it tells you what kind of question it is. You don't actually need to read the whole thing a lot of the time. What you can just do, or almost every time, you don't really need to read the whole thing. All you need to do is look out for these keywords. So if you see the words vulnerable to criticism, just those 3 words, you know that it's a flaw question. If you see takes for granted, fails to consider, obviously the word flawed, you know it's a flaw question. The only thing about the flawed, obviously it could be flaw parallel. You've probably seen those questions too, right? Where they say which of the following has similar flawed reasoning, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's assuming that it doesn't say similar reasoning. So I could put like a flawed minus similar reasoning. So it doesn't include similar reasoning, but it does say flawed.
Got it. Okay.
Then it's going to be a flawed question, flaw type question. And then you have it for the other ones too, right? So must be true. Follows logically, properly drawn, properly inferred, but that could also be a sufficient assumption. So the difference is follows logically if it has that word if, that's why it's in bold, it completely changes it. It changes it into a sufficient assumption question.
Got it. Okay.
But if you see these 3 words, right, these 3 or these 3 or these 3, then you know it's a sufficient assumption question. And you don't really have to think as much. And if you think about it, let's say you say 5 seconds on each question. 25 questions times 5 seconds, that's over over 2 minutes, right? That you're saving right there. And in 2 minutes, you can get an extra point or 2. So it can make a big difference, just those little things, because it's such a tight test. The time limit is so tight.
Yeah.
Then you have the steps. So step by step, how to answer the question. Theoretically, if you do all of these steps, you cannot get a question wrong. However, obviously, you can make mistakes. So that's even if you do every step, you can make a mistake and then pick the wrong answer. But theoretically, if you follow every step, it's impossible to get if you follow every step and don't make a mistake, it's impossible to make a mistake. But that's kind of circular, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so the point is, it gives you the step-by-step of how to find the right answer. And it really works because each question is very different. It's looking for a different thing. But a lot of them are very similar as well. So it just depends, actually. But usually how the questions work is there's a few different types of questions. There's critical questions, there's passive questions. There's really only 2 main types of questions, which is the critical versus the passive. In the critical questions, you're trying to find out what's wrong with the argument. In the passive questions, you're just trying to understand the argument. Okay? But in the critical questions, they deviate a lot. So in the critical questions, necessary assumption and sufficient assumption, they're both critical questions, but and they start out the same. You know, you're gonna go, I'm gonna read the argument, I'm gonna read the premises, the conclusion, and think about why do the premises not prove the conclusion. So they start out the same, but then they deviate because in a necessary assumption, you need to find what needs to be true in order for the argument to work. Whereas sufficient assumption is the opposite way around. It's more like if something is true, if X is true, or answer choice C is true, if it's the right answer, it's going to make the conclusion 100% guaranteed. So it's like similar words, but used in a different way. So it means something differently. It means something different. So I'll break those down for you better. But I was just giving you an example of really there's only two main question types of critical versus passive. But so the beginning steps for most of the questions are the same. So the beginning steps start out the same for most of the questions, if they're critical. And then for the passive questions, they also start out the same, but then they deviate at the end.
Okay.
So the good thing about that is the questions are not as different as you think, or you may think, or people tell you. The questions are actually very similar to each other. All the critical questions and all the passive questions, they're very similar to each other. It's just that they deviate around the end. And then that's really what we're going to talk about is, and that's what you'll see from the process that I teach you.
Yeah.
Is that most of the questions you do them the same way. It's just at the end you kind of change a little bit. So I think we should just start out with, I think you know all the basics, I'm sure. So I'm just going to review them with you. And I'm just going to quiz you a little bit, right? And then what we'll do is we'll get started with some of the question types, or at least one of them. See how many we can get through in one session. So I'm going to open up a document just so I can take notes or just write stuff so it's easier to take in. Because I know all the stuff that I told you about necessary assumption, sufficient assumption, I totally get it if it didn't stick. Because that was just an example. I wasn't actually, I'll do an actual lesson on both of those.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so just getting some blank paper. I want to ask you, how would you define a conclusion? How would you define a premise?
A premise supports the conclusion.
Okay.
And then conclusion is what comes out of a premise. Like,
Yeah, I see what you're saying completely. I'll give you a little bit of a more, yeah, go ahead.
a detailed answer.
Not even a detail, actually a simpler answer and a more to the point answer. So these are the definitions that I like. I like to define conclusion as what is the author trying to prove, and the premises, there could be multiple of them.
Yeah.
I say the reasons why.
Okay.
Or the reasons why the author thinks I should believe them. So I'm sure you kind of had that in your head, but now that you see these two definitions, is it a little bit more straightforward?
A lot simpler.
Yeah, a lot simpler, right?
Yeah.
So the conclusion is I can come up with an argument. I'll ask you to do the same. So let's say my argument is, and I don't know, if you have brothers or something, they'll probably talk about this all the time, but LeBron James is the best basketball player in the world. That's my conclusion. And then my premises are why. So my reasons are he went to 7 championships in a row. He is 6'8", 260 pounds or whatever. He's a crazy athlete. He's the best athlete in the league. I don't know if any of that is true, but those are my premises, right? So that's how easy it is to come up with an argument if you have a more simple. So I want you to come up with one. It can be something you believe in. It doesn't have to be something you believe in.
Okay, I'll do sports one too.
Okay.
Alex Burrows is the best forward in the NHL.
Okay.
And then the premise could be because he's scored the most goals as a forward.
Mm-hmm.
He has the highest number of points.
Okay.
I think that's about it.
Okay. Now let's.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's your opinion. The conclusion is like an opinion.
Yeah.
Think about it as an opinion. So Alex is the best. Sorry, you said best forward. And why? Because most goals. What was the other reason?
Highest points in the NHL.
Okay. And I don't know if you said anything else.
No, that was it.
Okay. Now, let's say this was a necessary. Well, that's a little bit harder. Let's say this is a flaw question. Or actually, let's say weakening. I think that would be the most intuitive one. So I want you to argue against yourself. So you said this is true because of this. If this was a weakening question and we want to weaken this argument, how do you understand that? If I wanted to weaken it, what would I say? Or what would be a right answer?
Like, there could be other players that have just as many goals.
Okay. Yes. So maybe he's
Of the
tied for
highest
the most
goals.
goals.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good one. So to weaken it, we could say, well, player X has the same number of goals/points. Well, that completely weakens the argument, right?
Yeah.
So now he's not necessarily the best. He might be tied for the best or
Yeah.
one of the best, but it doesn't seem like he's necessarily the best. And more importantly, it's more not even that this conclusion is not necessarily true anymore. It's more that you can't use this reason anymore to prove this. That's more what it's about. So keep that in mind when you're doing LSAT questions. It's more about now you're showing that this reasoning is not a good reason to believe in this. And that's the purpose of a weakening question. Do you see the distinction we made right now versus how maybe you thought of it before?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's how I want you to think about it, is more like, how can I show that this necessarily is not the reason to believe in this? It's not always going to be like that. Sometimes it's just going to be like, give me a reason why this is not necessarily true. But in this situation, it was more, well, we showed why this premise doesn't necessarily support the conclusion. Sometimes it will just be give evidence for why this is not necessarily true. So another way to weaken could be something like Alex is retired. Well, he can't be the best anymore if he's retired. Maybe he was the best. Or Alex just suffered a major injury that will hamper his abilities forever, let's say. Right? So this is more of a just directly attacking the conclusion, whereas this is more attacking the link between the two. This one.
Okay.
So you can do it in both ways, but typically the LSAT likes to do it the first way. Okay, but you can think about it in both ways. Now, if it was a flaw question, I think you said this earlier, actually. So if it's a flaw question, you were saying, well, there could be other things that are important for determining the best forward. I don't know if you said that. Was that something you were going to say?
No, I said there are other players with the same amount of goals.
Oh, okay. So I thought you were going to go this way, where you're going to say there could be other things that are important for determining the best forward. So if it was a flaw question,
yeah,
this is how you would answer it. you would go, you're going to show what is the person that's making this argument, which is you. What are you potentially missing out on? What did you fail to consider? You probably read that, right?
Yeah.
What did you fail to consider, or what did you take for granted? And we'll talk about those two things. They're actually two sides of the same coin. So we'll talk about them. I'm going to ask you a little bit harder one. So what if I say sufficient assumption? Do you know what the goal of a sufficient assumption question is?
To have like the answer like good enough for it to be true. Like it's okay to believe that it'll be true.
That's a little bit more necessary assumption. Sufficient assumption is a little bit stronger. So sufficient assumption, what we're trying to do here is, maybe we'll talk about it when we get there. Hold on. We'll talk about it later then.
Okay.
Right now, I kind of just want to figure out how much you know and what's missing. So that's definitely something we'll talk about. But yeah, right now, for now, we'll stick with just this part. I don't want to overload you with information. So we have a good idea of what a conclusion and premises are. We have a good idea of how to make an argument, how to weaken an argument, and how to point out the flaw in an argument, right?
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about the flaws. So this book is called the LSAT Trainer. Have you read this book?
No.
No? Okay, good. So this is a good one for logical reasoning.
Okay.
For reading comprehension, I actually think that it teaches you some incorrect things. So I wouldn't use it for reading comprehension. But you can use it for logical reasoning. And the reason I like it for logical reasoning is that it's really good for doing those critical questions. And remember, the critical questions are the ones that want you to find out what's wrong with the argument. Okay. And examples are, you can name them too. Which ones do you think are the critical questions?
Like from the
Which one?
sorry, you're asking from like the different kinds
From
of
the different question types. I don't know how many of them you know off the top of your head, but which ones would you say are critical questions? Have you studied logical reasoning in that way of breaking down the questions into different question types?
Not
A little
really.
bit, right? Not that much. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just give you some quick examples like flaw, weakening, essay, NA, principle. It's like those questions, which we'll do later.
Okay.
Okay, for now, let's just focus on the flaws then. So these flaw drills are really good. They help you learn the different logical fallacies that show up on the LSAT. So on the LSAT, I like to think of a lot of the logical reasoning questions as just the same skeleton with a different set of meat and skin on it. Okay. They're the same logic underneath, but they just use a different situation. So they'll make an argument about Swiss cheese and bacteria or something, and it will have the same logical fallacy as some other argument about mice and their reproduction habits or whatever. Like they'll make arguments that are on the surface, they're very different things. You're talking about cheese versus mice, but they'll make the same type of logical error between the questions, or between the arguments. And what you need to be able to find is that, wait, I've actually seen that question before, just in a different outfit, right? I've actually seen that person before, but they were just wearing something completely different. I want you to start noticing those things eventually. So the way you do that is by learning the logical fallacies. And that's another prep material that I'll give you in that folder. So I'll just show you that real quick. But this is also something in that prep materials folder that I'll share. And it has a list of the logical fallacies a description of them, and then an example. Do you know what a logical fallacy is?
Not really.
Not really. So a logical fallacy is an error in reasoning that happens quite frequently. It's a pattern that people do it a lot.
Okay.
One of those you probably heard of them. You probably just haven't heard of
I
the.
have heard of them, but I don't know the exact definition to it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. You just don't know the term for it, but you
Yeah.
know examples of it, I'm sure. So you know something like confirmation bias, for example. So this is where, let's say I believe in something. I believe that vaccines are cause autism, right?
Yeah.
If I have confirmation bias, I'm gonna go online and look for data or evidence that supports what I already believe, and then just pay attention to those. I'm not going to pay attention to the 99% of studies that say that it doesn't have an effect. I'm going to hyper focus on that one study that says that there is a link between the two.
Got it. Okay.
So that's an example of a logical fallacy or a bias, right? And I'm sure you heard of that before, maybe a long time ago now.
Yeah.
Maybe in university or high school you'd learn about these, but that's an example of one. That's not really one that you'll find on the test. The ones that you'll find on the test are in that list on that Google Sheet or Google Doc.
Got it.
So you'll get that after. But what I want you to be able to do is go, okay, question number 10 on this test is a correlation causation fallacy, which is the same thing that I saw on question 25 of that last test that I did, right? You don't need to remember which question it was, but you can go, this
I've seen it.
mistake. Yeah, exactly. This mistake is the same one as that one that I did on that other test. I don't remember which one, but it was somewhere back there. And I know exactly what's wrong with this because it's the same thing that was wrong with the other one. Or I know how to weaken this because I've done this a million times now. I know how to weaken a correlation causation argument. Stuff like that. So that's how I want you to be able to do the test. Like you can see those patterns in the different questions. Okay, this book helps you do that. So this first one, it's not exactly what I was saying, but it's more like this also wants you to learn about fails to consider and takes for granted. Yeah. So
This is similar
again,
to like weakening, right? Like
similar, but it's actually flaw questions. Flaw questions are going to be the ones that have fails to consider and takes for granted, right?
Okay.
Because for flaw questions, you're just pointing out what's
wrong.
About. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Whereas with weakening, it's presenting a new fact that
weakens
the argument. Yeah. Fails to consider, takes for granted, flaw questions. There's no new fact that you're introducing. You're just talking about what they did wrong. Okay. So again, I'm going to do a really simple definition for these two. How do you, and first I'll ask you, and I feel bad because I'm probably going to change your definition, but I just want to know, how do you understand these two? Fails to consider and takes for granted.
Fails to consider, like, doesn't recognize that I was gonna say it doesn't recognize that there could be other factors.
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
But isn't that including like outside information that's not
No.
a stimulant?
No, it has to be relevant. As long as it's relevant, because the thing is, any weakening question will always introduce new information, right?
Yeah.
The thing that you're thinking about is a little bit different. What you want to do is not make assumptions, and we'll talk about that when we do an actual question.
Okay.
We'll talk about not making assumptions in order to. That's more like what happens to people is they make assumptions to help answer choices.
Yeah.
And they pick an answer choice because they say,
this sounds right.
Yeah, and they help the answer choice too much by assuming things. But you have to go by what it actually said. So we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
It's a good one to talk about later. But for fails to consider, yeah, your definition was good. You have a good understanding of it, I think. What about takes for granted?
That's a little tricky.
hmm
Um,
Think about are you probably, I mean, the thing about the LSAT is no one speaks like this in real life, but if you were to use takes for granted in a sentence, or if you're in a situation, think about a real life situation where you know that someone's taking something for granted. Not in like a relationship where they're taking a
yeah.
person for granted, but different definition or different situation.
Um, I don't know how to explain it in like a
Not sure. That's fine.
definition way.
That's fine. Here, I'll give you really simple, again, just like the conclusion premise, really simple definitions for the two. So fails to consider, I just define it as doesn't assume, and then takes for granted, I define it as assumes.
Assumes.
Yeah,
Got it. Okay.
that's how you can think about them. Or in this one, you could say forgets about.
Okay.
Right? Let's think about your original argument or my original argument. They're pretty similar. So Alex is the best. I forgot his last name. Sorry, I didn't hear it correctly. What was the last name?
Alex Bros.
Alex Burrows.
Yeah.
Okay. So Alex Burrows is the best forward in the NHL, you said?
Yes.
Okay. Alex Burrows is the best forward in the NHL because most points and most goals as a forward. What did you forget about, do you think? What did you fail to consider, quote unquote?
Um, like other factors.
Yeah, and actually you came up with one earlier, right? Because you said fails to consider that there may be
Other players.
another. Exactly. So you actually
So,
came up with one. Yeah. So that's a fails to consider. Do you think you could take that same flaw that you pointed out? Let me write it down so it's a little bit easier. So let's say we take that same flaw, forgets about the possibility that there could be another player with the same stats, right? Another forward, let's say.
yeah.
Okay. Could you take that same thing and turn it into a takes for granted or assumes sentence? So assumes that,
There's another player with the same amount of stats.
but in the like, I want you to be countering. So if you're trying to point out what's wrong with the argument, would you say that assumes
Assumes
that
that Alex Burrows is the only one with the highest
exactly?
number of stats.
Yes. So remember I was saying before, they are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
So you can say the same exact thing that you say in fails to consider, you can say it as a takes for granted. And you've probably never seen that before or been told that before.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. But it's something that nobody teaches, but it's something that when you teach LSAT for 5 years, you realize these things. So I realized that a while ago and I was like, they don't really make it obvious. People like how this drill is actually set up is it wants you to go, is this a fails to consider argument or is this a takes for granted argument? And I realized after a while, because people were having such different answers on this. Some people would say takes for granted, some people would say fails to consider. I'm like, actually, you can look at all of them in both ways. So whenever you get a question that has fails to consider or takes for granted, you can think about it in these ways. So fails to consider, you think about in forgets about or doesn't think about, and then takes for granted, you think about assumes. Just one word, assumes.
Okay.
That's a very simple way to think about those two. Okay, now let's do the actual drill. Let's do a couple of them. and then I want you to do all of them after on your own time.
Got it. Okay.
So since Billy got a cookie, I should get a cookie. So what do you think this person fails to consider? And what do we call fails to consider again?
Forgets about.
Forgets about. So forgets about the,
Um,
or forget, I'll let you finish it.
Forgets about that maybe she shouldn't get a cookie.
Yeah, about the fact or the possibility that I think I want you to change it a little bit. Forgets about the possibility that she
Um,
or that how I want you the thing about what you did is you attack the conclusion and just change the conclusion.
yeah. Forgets about the
Think about it
possibility.
a little bit differently.
Forgets about that. Just because Billy got a cookie doesn't mean she should get a cookie.
Yeah, exactly. Forgets about the possibility that just because he got a cookie doesn't necessarily mean that she should get one. Yeah.
Okay.
And you could even make this a fact, but possibility is better because it's better to not be super strong on those. Okay, takes for granted, which is the same as.
Assumes.
Okay, so what did she assumes?
Um,
Sorry, what did she assume?
that because Billy got a cookie, she should get a cookie.
Exactly. That just, and I'll use the same words just to show, it's the same thing. Assumes that just because B got a cookie,
I should get a cookie.
yeah. There you go. So that falls into one of the logical fallacies.
Okay.
I think it's kind of a part versus whole. But I'm gonna ignore that for now. For this one, I'm gonna ignore for now because this one is kind of too basic of an argument. It's not even. It's okay. Let's do the second one. And we'll spend more time on the second one and talk about what the actual fallacy is because it comes up a lot. So this one.
Candy is healthy
How
because
would you point out the flaw in this one?
It forgets that candy could also have other
Mm-hmm.
risk factors that are proved to be not healthy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And maybe said in a little bit different way, could have many things in it that make it unhealthy. Yeah. Unhealthy, we'll say unhealthy overall. And then takes for granted or assumes.
That just because it has vitamin C, candy's good.
Yep. There you go. So same flaw, just said in two different ways. Now, this one falls very neatly into one of the logical fallacies that we talk about. And it is part versus whole. I don't know if you learned about this.
No, I didn't.
No? So just from the name, you could probably guess what it is and why this falls into it. You want to think about that a little bit and explain to me? So why do you think I say that this falls into the part versus whole fallacy? And what do you think part versus whole is referring to?
I actually have no idea.
No? Okay, maybe I'll ask it in a different way. So there's a part and a whole in this. What do you think would be the part, and what do you think would be the whole in this argument?
Candy is healthy because it contains vitamin C would be the whole.
Think about it a little bit, just one word. So
Oh,
which object would be the whole and which object would be the part? Which thing?
I think it's because in the which.
Okay. I'm asking a difficult question because you're not sure what I'm actually getting at.
Yeah.
So I'll show you what I mean. What I mean by that is the whole is the candy,
Oh.
and the part is what, do you think?
Um,
Think about it. What is a whole made out of? It's made out of parts, right?
yeah,
So candy is made out of one part of candy in this example is
vitamin C.
the vitamin C. Okay. Now, part versus whole fallacy, what it is where maybe you can, well, should I let you guess what it is? What part versus whole fallacy is then? If vitamin C is the part, candy is the whole, what do you think in general terms? What do you think the mistake here is that this person is making?
Saying that one thing is just like
Mhm.
one thing is good enough for it to be a whole. Like
Exactly,
considered
right?
healthy.
Yeah, so just one part of candy is healthy, so then candy is healthy overall? No, not necessarily, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Think about a computer, right? Uh, it has a really good, fast processor, but all the other parts are from 1992. It's not going to be a fast computer overall, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Like the part doesn't make the whole. Think about sports. Uh, Someone is 6'4" and in really good shape, but they don't know how to dribble a basketball. They can't play in the NBA tomorrow, right? Maybe one day, but they have the physical ability, but they don't have the technical ability. So that's like a part versus whole, where you say, well, this person can run really fast. They have really good vertical. They are a really good athlete. They can play in the NBA tomorrow. But what about all the skills that they need? Do they have the skills? So you're putting more emphasis
On
on
one thing.
one particular aspect while ignoring everything else.
Okay.
Right? And that's the exact same thing that's happening here, right? You're putting all your emphasis on the vitamin C, but you're ignoring the sugar, you're ignoring the high fructose corn syrup, you're ignoring whatever else is in candy, right? Sweeteners, artificial sweeteners, whatever. So just because it has one thing that's good about it doesn't mean the whole thing is good. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's your part versus whole fallacy in general. Can you think of an example and think about your own life that people try to convince you of things, or let's say you watch an advertisement and it tries to convince you of something, right?
Yeah.
Have you seen these part versus whole fallacies in your everyday life?
I mean, like I could use a makeup example.
Okay.
Um,
I'll try to
like
understand it.
oh sorry.
No, I'm joking. I have a wife, so I understand.
Oh,
I
okay.
think I'll understand it. I actually will, I think.
Like an advertisement, like, oh, if this like mascara
Okay.
uh makes your lashes look longer,
Okay.
would that work?
Yeah, so
Just because it
what are they ignoring?
like not everyone's lashes will do the same thing.
Mm, is that
Or is that different?
necessarily part versus whole, do you think?
Probably not.
You could think of one with the mascara. You could. So
Um,
let's use your example. I think you can come up with a part versus whole way to attack that. So I'm imagining a commercial. They are using the mascara, and then it plumps up the eyelashes, and then they
Yeah.
say, "Oh, look how great these eyelashes look with this mascara because of this mascara." What do you
Yeah.
think they're potentially? I think it's actually what you were saying. So I think you were on the right track actually, because you're saying basically, well, not everybody has potentially the eyelashes that work with that
Yeah.
mascara.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I get what you're saying. So yeah, that is kind of a part versus whole, because the key to having those really good, well, it's subjective, whatever people consider as those really good eyelashes. Um, well, part of it is a mascara, but another part of it is
Having the
genetics and
eyelashes to begin
upkeep
with.
and maintenance and everything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So absolutely, that's a part versus whole. Yeah. I think, yeah, advertising, probably you could think of a logical fallacy for every advertisement that you watch, right?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing to do. You'll start seeing the world differently after learning
I
something.
think I'll start picking up on that.
You will actually. It changes how you think, and it gets kind of annoying because sometimes people get annoyed that, oh, why are you nitpicking everything? And it's just
Yeah.
like,
And I think I've
well,
done it in the past myself. Like I've actually
mhm.
said it like this is not true just because it does this doesn't mean that
Yeah,
it's gonna
yeah,
work for
exactly. Because yeah, it's true, because these logical fallacies, people make them all the time.
yeah, right? Like
And
in their regular daily lives.
yeah, yeah. In the what's an example in that
But
in
like
that
a daily
example?
life.
Did you say dating life?
Oh no, daily life.
Daily life, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. But I was thinking part versus whole applies to dating too. Do you get what I'm getting at? Or can you think about what I'm
Not really.
not really? So, for example, um, parents might put a lot of emphasis on career and, let's just say career, right? When it comes to dating, a
Yeah.
parent might put all their emphasis on, okay, all that matters is that they have a good job, but then they ignore everything else, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So that's
That
do you
works.
see how that's a part versus whole fallacy,
Yeah.
right? Because they're overly focused on one aspect, but they ignore everything else. What if they're a psychopath? You know, what if they're,
Whatever.
yeah, anything could be wrong with them or not good for them, right?
Got it.
Or not good for the other person.
Yeah.
So that's a really obvious one. There's actually an example in here. If you look at this example, right? That's why I thought of it that's why I immediately understood when I thought you said that,
Oh,
because
okay.
there's an example in here, right?
Got
So
mixed. Yeah.
do you see how this is also a part versus whole?
Yeah.
Because what else is there to consider there?
Like, is he a good person? Is he like
Yeah,
there's so many other things to consider instead of
exactly.
just smart.
That arguably matter more, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So that part versus whole thing shows up all the time.
Okay.
Not just in the book, but on the actual test. So just get used to it, and that's a really good one to know. All of them are good to know, though. Okay, the next one. This one fits into one of the fallacies as well.
Alright.
What do you think? How would you describe? You don't even have to use the fails to consider takes for granted so much. Just tell me, how do you understand this, and do you think it's a good argument, bad argument? What do you think?
I would say it's like a bad argument.
Okay, why do you think so?
Because it says like there's no oh maybe not because it says there's no evidence that the monster is not real.
Hmm.
There's no evidence that
It's a little bit confusing, right? How it's
yes,
worded.
because I just read the not part. There's no evidence. So it's basically saying that there is evidence, right?
That's what it's concluding, right?
Yeah.
So think about these in conclusion and premise terms as well, right? So what is the conclusion in this one?
That the monster exists.
Probably exists, yeah.
Yeah, so it probably exists.
Okay, and the reason? Because?
Because there's no evidence that it does not exist. Doesn't
Yeah.
not exist.
There's no evidence that it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So basically, we don't have evidence that it's not there, so it must be there. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that that's think about it again. Do you think that that's a good reason?
I wouldn't say so, no.
Okay. Why? And honestly, this one's a little bit of a it's not a super common one. And it's how you generalize this one is evidence or lack of evidence against does not equal evidence for. So that's the more generalization of this one. And do you see how this would you say that this applies to this one, this argument?
Are you saying evidence for is like it's not enough for it to like exist?
What I'm saying is that just because you don't have evidence against something,
Yeah.
that fact that you don't have evidence for some sorry, the fact that you don't have evidence against something is not you cannot use it as evidence for something.
Oh, got it. Okay. So
Yeah.
because not like okay, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's pretty straightforward. I'm sure you could think of other examples, but there's no evidence against there's no evidence saying that aliens don't exist, so aliens probably exist. Well, I don't know. Can't really say aliens might exist, but that's not a good reason for believing it in it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Um it goes the other way too, by the way. So this is one way to do it. I think the more simple way is the other way, where you have lack of evidence for does not equal evidence against. So, for example, there is no evidence that aliens exist. So, ignore what I said before. This is a new one. So, I say there's no evidence that aliens exist. Therefore, aliens do not exist. Well, that's not necessarily true, right?
I think
Maybe we
that
just haven't
this way
found
is
that.
easier to understand.
It is. It is definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're two different things. That's the thing.
Okay.
So they're not the same fallacy. They're similar, right? It's kind of one is kind of like the opposite of the other. So if you have to know which one is which. So if I give you an example like um, if I give you an example like there is no evidence that aliens exist, therefore they do not exist. So this one fits into this one, right? Would you say so?
Yeah.
So that's different than the other one, which is lack of evidence against does not equal evidence for. If I was to make an alien argument for this one, it would be more like there is no evidence against the existence of aliens. Therefore, it probably exists. And that's the one that we got in the example, right? But do you see they're different things, but they're more like opposites. Let me know if something doesn't make sense.
Yes. Okay. Now, yeah. I had to reread it.
Right?
Sorry.
Yeah, they're different things, but they're opposites of each other. So they're easy to understand in tandem. The good news is the first one, the one on the top, that's actually the one that you'll see more often. So people will say, oh, there's no evidence of fraud here. Therefore, there definitely wasn't fraud. And when I say people, I actually mean on the LSAT, on the questions, right? Because they'll say politician, colon, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
right? So whoever's making the argument in that question, they'll make this error a lot more than the second one, which is a good thing. The first one's very easy to think about because I think it happens a lot in real life and there's no negatives going on and stuff like that. So it's easier to understand. So yeah, you don't have evidence for something, doesn't mean it's not there, right? I have no evidence that I have a brain inside my head, but I probably do. Everyone else does, so probably. Because I can't physically see it, right? I can't
Yeah.
touch it. I can't feel it. I could get a brain scan, but I've never done that before. So technically, I don't have any evidence that it's in there. But I'm pretty sure it's in there. Hopefully. Okay, so that's another one there, and the flip side was the other one that I showed up top.
Okay.
Okay, we'll do one more, and then maybe we'll take a break, or maybe I'll let you do the fallacies on your own after. But okay, so this next one is about Tangled. Have you seen Tangled?
I have not. No.
No, me neither. I just know it has a really good song. When Will My Life
Isn't it a
Begin?
kids movie? Like a.
It is, yeah. I think it came out when we were, at least I was a little bit too old for it when it came out. But I never watched Disney as a kid anyway.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, it came out in 2010. So
That's how
I don't,
old it is?
yeah, it's pretty old now. But
Oh, wow.
I think I was like a teenager at that time, so I was a little bit too
Is
old
there a
for it.
newer one? Or am I just mixing these movies up now?
Tangled 2? I don't know. There is a Tangled 2, but it came out in 2012.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't remember those. Wow. Okay.
No, time flies, I guess. Yeah. Anyway, so the reason they're using this example is because this is a 5-year-old making these arguments in this scenario.
Okay.
So scenario 1, it's a 5-year-old making these arguments. So keep that in mind because that's actually important for this one.
Okay.
So this is a 5-year-old making this argument, and she says, "Of course, Tangled is the best movie ever. All of my friends agree." So what do you think about that argument?
She forgets that there's more people than her friends.
That whose opinion matter, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like she's failing to consider that there are more people that would have opinions of the movie.
Yeah, and that their opinions are important, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she's basically saying like a small portion, like her friends, that's it.
Yeah, that's actually the more important thing. The second thing you said is that this is just a small portion of the population.
Yeah.
Right? So there's actually two things that are wrong with this one. So one is what you said the second time. I like that they're only asking 5-year-old girls, probably. I don't know. I don't think she's friends with 30-year-olds. So probably if it's her friends, it's most likely just other 5-year-old people.
Yeah.
So if they think Tangled is the best movie ever, that's not a representative sample. So that's the error with this one. If you were to generalize it, it's unrepresentative sample is the generalized fallacy here. I'm sure, I don't know if you take any stats courses or psych courses, you probably learned about unrepresentative samples, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Sorry, I learned it in psychology.
Cool. Yeah. So it's an unrepresentative sample, and how just fine tuning it for the LSAT, a definition for that. It's something where the data is not consistent with your conclusion. So data slash premise is not consistent with your conclusion. And let me explain that. So how that works is, if my conclusion is doctors in Canada over the age of 40 love Breaking Bad, right? And I'll say most doctors. So it's a little bit easier because it's hard to prove that every single doctor likes it. Well, let's even make it a little bit easier. Let's just say many. So there's a good amount of doctors in Canada over the age of 40 that love that show. Who should I be surveying then? If I want to prove this conclusion, who should I be surveying?
People over the age of 40.
Who over the age of 40?
People. Or sorry, doctors, I guess.
Doctors over the, yeah. So survey doctors over 40 in Canada, right? So it just has to be consistent. So if my conclusion is about doctors in Canada over the age of 40, I better only survey doctors in Canada over the age of 40. And what else should I do when I do this survey? I live in Toronto, so what else should I do when I do this survey?
Ask doctors in Toronto
And
over the age of 40.
yeah, but what is my conclusion? My conclusion is
Great.
doctors in Canada. So I should ask doctors where?
In Canada.
But across Canada, right?
Yeah.
Do you get what I mean? I don't want to just ask people in Toronto or doctors in Toronto.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so like Vancouver.
Yeah, because that's what it
Everywhere.
means to be representative, right? I'm giving a more representative sample. So I'm surveying across Canada, not just in one area in Canada.
Okay, yeah.
Right?
Different areas in Canada.
So think about that too. So whenever you get something that's based on research or surveys or something like that, always think about these things. And on the LSAT, right? When they give you an argument that's based on research like that, always think about these things. If they made a conclusion about people living in Vancouver in condo buildings, well, they shouldn't be interviewing people in Seattle that live in condo buildings, because that's not necessarily the same thing. Even though they're very close to each other, you're making a conclusion about Vancouver, so you should only ask people in Vancouver, right? So that's, and then the other way around too, where if I say in Canada or in Vancouver, well, I shouldn't just be surveying people in Vancouver that live around UBC. I should be surveying people that live all around Vancouver, right? To be representative. Yeah. So same thing in Canada, survey all around Canada, not just in one spot in Canada. So that's everything that goes into a representative sample. So it's actually really, really difficult to get a representative sample of something, depending on how precise your conclusion is. Because let's say my conclusion is people in the world like chocolate. That's a really hard one to survey for, because I got to survey people in everywhere, right?
Yeah. All over.
And not just one person in New York City. I would have to do a bunch of people in New York City. And not just one person in Mozambique, but at least a few people in Mozambique.
Yeah, so it's like very vague.
Yeah, because it's such a broad conclusion, then you need it's very hard to get a representative sample for that. But anyway, that's more detailed than you need to know. All you need to know is that it needs to be consistent between the conclusion and your premise. And I use premise, evidence, research. I use it interchangeably because that is what premises are, right? They're evidence or research,
Yeah.
right? Or reasons. Premises are also reasons. So all of those words you can use interchangeably. Yeah, right. So this one, clearly unrepresentative sample because they only asked 5-year-olds, most likely. We don't know for sure that it's an unrepresentative sample, but probably it is. The other thing, when it says best movie ever, because her friends agree with her. What do you think about that? Can you say that something is the best ever because a bunch of people think it's the best ever?
I would say no.
Not necessarily, right? Yeah. How do you, if something is subjective like that, does that mean it's the best? It could be the most liked or
Or
highly
like,
regarded,
but it can't
but
be like ever.
what are you gonna say?
Like it can't be the best ever with such a small portion of people.
That too, but even just the concept of, think about the concept of something being the best. When it comes to a movie, can you use opinions to necessarily say that something is the best ever? It's kind of hard
No.
to say, right? Because
Yeah.
that's very subjective.
Yeah.
So to say that it's the best movie ever that's problematic in and of itself. You should say something, what's easier to prove is something like it's the most popular movie ever, right? That you can be more certain about because you can say, oh, it's the most popular movie ever because 99% or like this is the movie where the most people like it, right? This is the #1 most popular movie, right?
Yeah.
You can say those things, but it's for something that's subjective, it's not really great to say that it's the best. It's hard, it's almost impossible to prove that really.
Okay.
So that will inherently be flawed. And I know we did a bunch of examples where we just talked about the best NBA player or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Or NHL player. But that concept in and of itself is a bit problematic because it's hard to say if something subjective is the best. Make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you get that? So that's just like a second flaw with this. The main thing is the unrepresentative sample. That's really what you want to think about in this one. But I have a problem with saying that something is the best when it's a movie, which is really subjective. Right? So you can think about that too. You might run into stuff like that. You might run into stuff like that on the test too, where they're trying to prove something subjective, but it's like you should be wary of that. When they're trying to prove something that's subjective, it's hard to say that something that's subjective is definitely this, definitely the best, or definitely the worst, or anything like that.
Okay.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we have like 13 minutes left. Do you want to, or 15, let's round up, 15 minutes left. Do you think it's too much to keep going, or do you want to just cut it there?
No, I can keep going.
You're good? Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so we'll keep going. So this is unrepresentative sample. I want you to learn some of the other ones. They'll be in that file that I share with you. For now, I think let's do a sample question just to keep things interesting. I'm going to pull up a random question and we'll do a flaw question because that's what we've been doing for a little bit now. So by the way, how are you doing the questions? Do you have the Law Hub membership?
I have the LSAT one.
Yeah.
And I have Khan Academy as well.
Okay. But on Khan Academy, you don't get all of the questions, right? It's just a few?
No, yeah.
So it's the LSAC thing where you get all of the questions, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So, I mean, I will share PDFs of all these. questions too. These are official questions. It's the same questions, but they're just numbered in a different way. They're organized in a different way.
Okay.
But they're the same questions that you'll find on Law Hub. But just the numbering is different. So you won't be able to say, okay, this test one, like on the LSAT thing, it goes test 1 something, 100 something. On these ones, it starts from test number 1. So the numbering is different. And don't think that 101 is the same as test 1. It's not. They're different.
Okay.
But the questions are the same. So you could potentially find this exact question like while doing your studying. You might run into it.
I'll do it again.
Yeah. So I'm gonna send you, like, in the file, in the documents that I send you, you'll have these PDFs to use if you want to. But obviously you can just continue using your Law Hub membership too.
Okay.
Okay, so let's find a flaw question. Okay, so do you see on this page? On this page, do you see a flaw question here? Which one or multiple do you think, or if any?
Number 8.
Mm-hmm. And it's easy, right? You just see the words vulnerable to criticism.
Yeah.
There you go. So that's all you need to know.
Okay.
And look, it's our friends that fails to consider, takes for granted. This one's a little bit different. Fails to define. That's a unique one. Fails to establish. That's a unique one too.
Okay.
But it's the stuff that we talked about. So all the stuff that we talked about, it's here. Okay, so this is a good one to kind of combine what we've done so far, right?
Okay.
So what I want you to think about here is, as you're reading this, tell me, what is the conclusion? What are the premises? And what do you think is the mistake that this union member is making, without looking at the choices?
Okay. Some labor union are calling. I feel like we must strike now is the conclusion.
Does it say we must strike now, or
Oh, sorry, we must not strike now.
must not strike now? Yeah, I agree. So the word therefore, by the way, is
Indicator.
usually, yeah, it's usually a giveaway. Okay, that's the conclusion. And then
a strike would cut into our strike fund and would in addition lead to a steep fine, causing us to suffer a major financial loss is the premise.
Yep, exactly. And then this first one is just the other people's opinion.
Okay.
So this is something we didn't talk about yet, but other person's argument is something that will come up a lot. So you probably seen it. And when I tell you about it, you'll realize, oh yeah, I've seen those. Where first they bring up what other people think, and then they either agree with it or, way more likely, they disagree with it, right?
Yeah.
So do you see that that's what's happening here? So they're bringing up some other person's argument, some other group's argument. It doesn't have to be one person. It could be group of people, class of people, whatever. So some people say that we should go for an immediate strike. However, we must not strike now because it would be a major financial issue for us. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So, very typical argument on the LSAT. Do you think this fits into one of our logical fallacies that we talked about?
Like a flaw question.
But remember the logical fallacies that we talked about. We talked about unrepresentative sample, part versus whole, and all of those. Would you say this one fits into one of them?
I feel like it could be a part versus whole.
I agree. It's not potentially the only mistake here, but it could fit into part versus whole. Why do you think so?
Because it says a strike would cut into our strike fund and would in addition lead to a steep fund. It doesn't necessarily like have like it could be for other reasons as well.
Yeah, exactly. So other reasons to strike or to not strike?
To strike.
Yes, to strike, because this person is saying don't strike.
Yeah.
Yes. So if we're trying to, it's a flaw question, we want to kind of take the opposite stance, right? Which is, well, what about the benefits of striking now? Because yes, there might be a financial loss. However,
But you could
maybe
benefit too.
maybe there's other benefits, right? That's what you're going to say?
Yeah.
Exactly. Cool. Perfect. So do you see how, so by the way, I picked these questions at random. And it just happens that the question that we picked at random is one of the ones that we talked about. So this happens all the time when I'm doing lessons and stuff, is that these things are so common that you can just pick a question randomly and run into the thing that we just talked about. Right?
Yeah.
And now I think, not just now, but I think when you review these things and really internalize them, then you'll notice these things. You'll notice the patterns.
Yeah.
Right? Even just the structure of the argument, right? The other person's argument. Whenever you see an other person's argument, like whenever they say some members, or they say some people, or some scientists, or some, some political theorists, whatever they say, most likely that's going to be someone else's argument, and whoever is writing it will disagree with them. Got that?
Yeah.
So that structure is very common. So even just that pattern, you'll start noticing. So when you start noticing these patterns, it just really speeds things up for you, because every question is not a new question anymore. It's something that's very similar to something you've already done. Got it?
Yeah.
Okay, so what you're saying is, well, yeah, there might be a financial loss. However, that's not the only thing that matters when it comes to striking. So is there an answer choice down here that aligns with what you're thinking?
Bills to consider a strike may cause the union to see?
I think so. I think so. That's exactly what you said, right?
Yeah, the benefits. There
Yeah.
could be benefits.
There you go. So do you see how easy the questions can be?
Yeah, I think I have a problem. Like I need to break it down and then answer the question. I think that's where I also struggle with.
What do you mean? Like,
Like
oh,
not,
I get what you mean. I know what you mean.
yeah.
You're saying you spend like 2 seconds up here and then you immediately go down here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone does that at the beginning. So
Yeah.
you have to change that completely.
Okay.
Just flip that. Spend like you, and you're already realizing this, but yeah, spend a lot of time up here. And then what happens is you barely have to spend any time here.
Okay.
Yeah, and overall, it will speed you up.
Okay.
Because at first, you're going to think, oh, why am I taking a minute just to read and understand the argument? No way I'm going to finish this question on time.
Yeah, and then I do find myself going back to the stem like a bunch
Exactly.
of times.
Exactly. So then you end up taking more time anyway.
Yeah.
Right? But if you just take a little bit longer up here and really get a good understanding of it, then it's so easy. You just pick the right answer because you already know the answer. That's where we want to get to, is that you already know the right answer. You're just trying to find it in the choices. Okay?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So I hope you see some of the benefits already of approaching these questions in a different way.
Oh yeah, big time.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. So I'll share all the resources with you. Do you have any questions before we go?
No.
Okay, awesome. You can always, we have the WhatsApp group, so you can always ask questions in there, and if I have some time, I'll always lend you a hand in there. Okay. If you run into something, if you run into a question that you don't understand, you can screenshot it and send it to us in that chat, and I'll answer it if you need me. Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks. We'll chat tomorrow then, right?
See you tomorrow. Bye.
Okay. Bye.